Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are going to take a look at the Mateba Unica 6, or Say Unica. This is a semi-automatic revolver, or rather it's a self-cocking revolver, and there are really only 3 of these designs that have come to significant mass production. There's this one, there's the Webley-Fosbery, which is fairly well known, and then there is the Union Firearms self-cocking semi-automatic revolver. I have videos on the other 2. This is the first time I've actually gotten my hands on a .44 Magnum Unica 6. Now, by the way, the name Unica 6 is a little bit of a play on words. In Italian, it's Sei Unica, which could mean unique 6. It is a pretty unique 6-shot revolver. It can also mean you are unique, which is kind of a fun little play on words. So it's basically the Italian .44 Magnum Special Snowflake revolver. They were offered in 3 different calibers. This is the middle-sized one. You can get them in .44 mag, .357 mag, or .454 Casull. So really pretty huge hand cannons. The .357 and .44 mag ones, actually all 3 of them, you had the ability to use lighter cartridges. So the .357 would also run 38 specials with a change of mainspring. The .44 mag here will run 44 specials with a change of mag spring. And you could more or less do that with the .454 Casull running 45 Colt with a change of mag spring, although apparently that one wasn't quite as well worked out at the factory as sort of the 2 more standard, more popular sizes. So this was designed by an Italian gentleman by the name of Emilio Ghisoni. He was in Pavia, Italy, and it basically inherited a family business that made machinery. It was an industrial concern, and stereotypical perhaps of Italy, it originally made pasta-making machinery. Well, Emilio was interested in firearms, started developing some of his own firearms design. He was particularly into revolvers, maybe large bore revolvers, but definitely low bore axis revolvers. And his first development was the MTR-8, which I have a previous video on, which is not a semi-automatic revolver, but it is a really unorthodox low bore axis revolver. He followed that with his 2006 M, not in 2006 though. And that was a gun that looks very much like the Unica 6, but again is not semi-automatic. And then in the mid-1990s, mid to late 1990s, he develops this. And the idea of the semi-automatic action is 2 things. First off, it gives you a single action trigger pull automatically with each shot, which is nice, just like a semi-automatic single action pistol. And that the recoiling action of the gun is going to eat up some of the recoil. And I'll show you how that works in a moment when we take a closer look. But these were put into production in 1997, and they were in production until 2005 when the company went bankrupt, because as it turns out, making really, precision, finely made, very accurate revolvers that were quite expensive and now are extremely expensive today, that are really kind of a niche market, is not always a great business plan. Company went bankrupt in 2005. Now, it looks like they've announced that they're back and things are going to go back into production, but that was right before the pandemic. It's unclear exactly what's happened in the couple of years since. I haven't seen any new Matebas. It'd be really cool if there were, but to be honest, I'm not going to hold my breath. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this. I'll show you how it works, and we'll go ahead and take it apart, which is something that I don't think you can find elsewhere on YouTube at this point. This thing is beautifully blued, and I'm going to be leaving fingerprints all over it. I apologize for that. Let's start with a few of the markings. Mateba here is actually an acronym. The full name of the manufacturing company is Macchine Termoballistiche, which is like thermoballistic machines, and you take the first 2 letters of each word and you get Mateba out of Pavia, Italy. And the caliber of this one is .44 Remington Magnum. We've got a serial number, we've got our American importer mark. There's the actual model name, 6 Unica, or Say Unica. Proof marks on the cylinder, proof marks on the frame, and the Mateba logo there. And yes, thank you, legislation, read the manual before use. So the 2 things that make this unusual are the fact that it fires from the bottom chamber of the cylinder here, not the top, and that it is essentially semi-automatic. So when you fire, the whole upper portion of the gun reciprocates backward. And if you look at the cylinder there, you can see that on the return forward stroke, it indexes the cylinder 1 position. We have an exposed hammer here, and if I have that, well, what'll happen is the hammer is cocked, I pull the trigger, the hammer falls, fires a cartridge, this cycles back, recocks the hammer, trigger disconnects like a semi-auto pistol trigger, and it's ready to fire again. Other than the trigger and hammer, the only control on here is this ambidextrous cylinder latch. I push that down and I can pop the cylinder out to the left. So you've got a spring-loaded ejector star there. Reload it. You do have to have it down in order to lock the cylinder back in place, pop it up, and the cylinder will then snap into position. The sights are pretty simple. We just have a square open notch back here, and the rear sight is not adjustable. The front sight is a square post, and it is adjustable for both elevation and windage. That's an adjustment screw down in there. That's a little bit unusual. Usually you would see one on the front sight and one on the rear sight. In this case, it is because the barrels are interchangeable along with their barrel shrouds and their front sights. And so with this system, if you have multiple barrels, you can actually zero each barrel independently. There are a couple interesting effects of using the bottom chamber in the cylinder to fire instead of the traditional top one. One, of course, is it's a very low bore axis. Your recoil impulse is going to come through here, which is really pretty darn close to the axis of your hand when you're shooting it, and that's going to work to mitigate the amount of muzzle climb from firing, although when we get this out to the range, we'll see if that holds true or not. But the other interesting effect here is, look at the frame. This is an open-topped frame. This isn't the sort of thing that we've normally seen in, well, basically any modern revolver since the advent of smokeless powder. Traditionally, typically, if you have a revolver, especially one in a heavy caliber like .44 Magnum, you can't have the top of the frame open. You've got to enclose that thing so that the frame is strong enough to hold the blast of firing and the tendency of this to widen under recoil. Well, this is feasible technically on the Mateba because it fires from the very bottom chamber. So most of the force is exerted down here, not up here. There's a lot less leverage trying to open up this frame, and so this is mechanically acceptable. And these are in fact very well made, very precise shooting revolvers. They don't tend to suffer from the frames stretching, which is counterintuitive. You would think that a .44 mag or even a .454 Casull with an open frame would have immediate and terrible problems with the frame stretching open from the force of firing, but not on the Matebas. Now, before we take this apart, there are a couple interesting design features to it. One of them is this series of round holes in the back of the cylinder. You'll notice there are no notches in the outside of the cylinder. Well, the way revolvers work, there are basically two mechanical things that have to happen. You need the revolver to somehow index the cylinder, to turn it to the right position, and then lock it in that position. And most typical revolvers will have a notch on the outside of the cylinder and a little hand that reaches up through the bottom of the frame into that notch to lock the cylinder in position. The Unica 6 does not. It has, so that's the firing pin right there. The Unica 6 has a pin right there that locks the cylinder in position. And you can see when I relock the cylinder in place, that pin comes out. So when this is cycling, that pin retracts inward enough for the cylinder to be rotated. We have a hand right here that is going to push on the ratchet on the pawls on the inside of the cylinder right there. So again, when this cycles, you can see that hand moving. It's going to index the cylinder one position. This peg then comes back out into place to lock it in position, and then you're ready to fire. And that little silver protrusion above the screw is the firing pin. So when I push that, the firing pin is going to protrude through the breech face right there and fire the pistol. It is a spring-loaded firing pin, which is nice, but there's no other particular safety on it. Like I said, there's no manual safety. This is intended really as a target pistol. It is remarkably accurate, very expensive, very well made. Not really the sort of thing that is intended for day-to-day carry. Now, let's go ahead and take it apart. There are some other cool features here. This is the 8-inch barrel. The barrels were actually available in 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8-inch, and they are interchangeable. So let's see, we'll start with disassembly, taking the slide assembly off of the frame, and that is done by taking out this little tiny set screw. By the way, I would like to give a big thank you to Select Fire Weaponry of Waukegan, Wisconsin for loaning me this pistol to film for you guys. These are stupidly expensive guns today, and it was very kind of them to give me access to this one and to tell me I was free to go out and fire it, which we'll do once we're done disassembling it. All right, I've got that screw removed. Don't lose this thing or you're in deep trouble. Now I just want to push back on the upper slide a little bit to take tension off. You can see this pin is actually what is preventing the slide from going forward. The slide hits it right there. So I'm going to pull this back a bit, and then I can pull it out the side. There's a little threaded hole in this, and that's where that set screw locks in, which that set screw just keeps this from sliding out when you don't want to disassemble the thing. And now we can just pull the slide right off the frame. As this is essentially a semi-automatic revolver, we do need a recoil spring. That's right here. That rests on this peg through the frame, and it pushes the slide forward after recoil pushes it backward. There's our hammer assembly. There is also this protrusion right here. That is actually the disconnect. So when I fire the gun, that is going to push down and reset the trigger. On the bottom of the slide, we have a cutout right here. That is where this little arm rests when the slide is all the way forward. So it can fire, and when it starts moving back, it's going to push down on that disconnector right there, which will reset the trigger. That prevents it from firing full auto. This arm right here connects to this arm on the slide, and so as the slide goes back, this is going to push on this arm, which is going to recock the hammer. I can also take off the grips here. These are not the original grips. Someone has made these. The original grips were wooden, and apparently they were fine on the 357s. On the 44s and the 454s, the wooden grips had a tendency to crack. As you can see, there's there's nothing really coming down out of the frame for the center of the grips. So it was a solid wooden grip originally, and that's why it had some issues. This is metal with a couple of wooden plates in it, and we just have a plug here and a screw holding the grips on. That's a good thing because that means this isn't likely to actually break when you're shooting the thing. Next up, we have the slide assembly, and we can actually take the barrel out. So there's a pair of flats here so that you can put a wrench on them. This one's relatively loose already, and I can just unscrew it by hand. You can't really do that when this is on the gun because there's a lot of spring tension holding it in place. But there we go, get it all the way unscrewed, and the barrel extension, I suppose, the top part of the frame there comes apart from the barrel shroud, and this is aluminum. That's steel. This is just aluminum, and the barrel. And that's just a shim to put the barrel at the proper position. This does actually also have a threaded muzzle, and there were muzzle brakes that were made for these that you will sometimes see, especially in some of the other videos showing these things online. In theory, you could probably put a suppressor on this. You'd be adding weight to a recoiling system, so you might have to tinker with it to get it to work properly. Also, you'd have to find a suppressor that fits that threading, which is going to be a unique sort of thing. But barrels for these were interchangeable, so you could get barrels and shrouds of different lengths and swap them onto your gun if you wanted to have a long barrel like this and also a short barrel. And here's our last part. Not really anything to take apart here. You pretty much saw this all already. It's a pretty simple thing. We've just got a pivoting arm here that's going to work in conjunction with the lower frame to recock the action when it cycles and to index the cylinder. And that's about it. There you go. There is a disassembled Mateba Sei Unica. Now, let's go ahead and take it out to the range and do some shooting with it. I have all of 18 rounds of ammo. Long story. I need to stock some more 44 Magnum in general. But I've got a spinner here, and I've got a static target plate. Actually, it's a Mini-Mo from MOA targets. We're going to start with the Mini-Mo so I can see if this thing's zeroed and how badly or gently it recoils. In theory, the self-cocking action ought to handle some of the recoil. So we'll start with it cocked. It's not bad. Let's see. Ow, that hurt. Point of reference, the cylinder comes back when you fire it. So don't put your thumb in the way of the cylinder. I probably should have recognized that. So when it comes to muzzle flip and kick, it's not that, it's not an oppressively painful gun to shoot. And I think largely that's partly from the mass and partly from the reciprocating action of the upper assembly every time you fire. However, it has more muzzle flip than I necessarily would have expected. And I think that also comes from the reciprocating action of the whole upper assembly. You're going to get a little bit of flip when you initially fire from the bullet exiting, although that's minimized by the fact that it is firing out of the bottom chamber of the cylinder. However, when this whole mass hits the end of travel right there, that is going to provide a lot of moment to kick the whole thing up. So, let's see if I can run a spinner with it. I'm not going to try and reload this on the clock, so to speak, but 44 mag might be able to run that spinner with just one cylinder. It helps to hit. You're out. Am I out? Oh, I'm out. Damn. Well, it was close. That was interesting. Some of those hits had a lot more impact than others. And I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe just hitting in different places on the plate. I don't have enough ammo to give this like a perfect 0 on paper before we start shooting. So. All right. The spinner is completely stopped now. I have one last speed loader. Shall we use it on the spinner?
I think so.
All right. Oh, come on. This should have more impact. Also, I should have. All right, well, 5 for 6 hits, but no spinny.
We'll make it spin in post.
There you go. All right, guys. Well, I've been wanting to film one of these and frankly shoot one of these for a long time. I had a friend like 20 years ago buy one of these when I knew him, and I should have gotten one at the same time, and I didn't. And so it's been a long time since I got access to one, but big thanks to Select Fire Weaponry for sending me this one on loan to film for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.